Work out, but you want to go for a ride? The plate light out. There we go. Hey guys, how's it going? Hey, I'm finishing up this project I've been working on this winter. For those who don't know, it's a Karmann Ghia I got from a friend of mine that was all tore apart. And we put it back together as a driver. And I live in New England. New England, all your cars go to rusty. 10-year-old cars are rotted out. You know, here's a 55-year-old car that is not much better. So it was put together as a driver. It has some metal patched in it. It has rust issues, but I want to do my best to stop that from happening more in the future. So what we're going to do and get into today is how I go about protecting the underneath of the car. Give me a second and we'll get into it. Yes, I threw some white towels down to hopefully have the image look a little bit better. So I'm going to address a couple of things that people have been talking about in the past videos, why I didn't do certain things, and I'll give you my opinion on what that is, what I've tried, what I haven't tried, what I found works best. So we'll go and move on. First would be a lot of guys talking about when I weld up some metal and I didn't prep the surface behind it with copper weld and put that on. I bought it, I've tried it. What I found is when you're doing welding, generally about an inch path all the way where around the weld is, this completely burns off and is pretty much gone. So I don't see it being much of a benefit, possibly even a little bit of a hindrance with the quality of the weld. I don't know if it interferes with the weld. Well, I just didn't find much of a benefit to using it. I've had it, I tried it. That's my opinion on it. Next would be, why don't you put and convert the rust that you have inside? And this is an example. Most of these are of the acid base, like a phosphoric acid, and what they do is do a kind of a chemical change to the metal. Let's give this a little setup. So what that does, it takes the metal and converts it from, I'm not going to get the properties correct. Feel free to fill in who wants to write in down below. But it does a chemical change to the metal and it turns the rust into, man, I forget. Anyway, we'll move on. So that kind of makes a barrier and seals rust from happening any further. I did a rocker panel on this car and I opened up the inside. This is actually the outside of the rocker panel. Well, on the internal sides of it, pretty much all look like this also. I mean, people got very upset that I just closed it up without addressing that in any fashion. Well, the problem is, if you're in an open area, if you're trying to do an open panel like the inside of a quarter panel that's all open smooth metal like this, I could see the benefit of using it. The problem comes when you start working on something that has seams, and say like the corner, I don't have anything right near me, we'll just use this box for an example. You know, you got a pinch weld welded together on something. It's basically two pieces of metal together. Where you go and spray this, you're not getting down into where the pinch weld is, and this stuff kind of cures up fairly quickly. It goes from a liquid state to, you know, whatever it cures at fairly quickly. So what I'm afraid of is where the pinch weld is down in the, we'll visualize, let's go with this being the bottom of the car, and the very bottom of the car there's a pinch weld that in there is going to be a bunch of rusty metal on top of the rust that's in here. So you spray this wherever you can spray from what you opened up, get to kind of what you can get, but it's not going down into that seam where you have an issue. It's also not going into areas that you haven't opened up, so it's only where you can kind of spray it. So what happens is you end up like over soaking it, and the liquid actually kind of just like runs down and just kind of puddles up in the corner. I don't know how much of an effect that is going to have trying to stop rust from the next step that I like to do, which is using actually bar and chain oil. I've tried a bunch of different ones. I used to go with motor oil. It was very popular in 50s and 60s. People would take their old oil when they did an oil change and they would actually just kind of, you know, take a paintbrush and spray it up underneath their car. Well, it went from that to, and it worked. It was a good defense, but the problem is it also does kind of wash off fairly quickly, and the smell's not that great. So I've done from that, I went to new motor oil, and what I found that works the best for me is bar and chain oil. It doesn't really, I don't really have a particular brand that I like, but I can tell you that There's a summer mix and a winter mix. You kind of want to go with the summer mix. It's just a thicker setup, and that's what you want under the car. You want it so it doesn't get washed off. On the inside of like doors and all, really not much affects it because it's not getting splashed on or wind blown against it. It kind of, wherever you put it, stays put. You know, same true of motor oil. But this stuff, over time, when you use it, it kind of wants to wick. It stays, hold on a second. So here's some in a cup. So what it does, because when you put it on, it has a tendency, now we're going to spray it on, but you can also, you know, brush it. We're going to thin it and spray it. But over time, I don't know if you can see it, there's like some pinholes in it, and they're kind of closing up as it sits there. Well, that's what that does. It is, I'm going to call it self-healing, but it never cures. It never really goes hard, solid rock like paint does, like undercoating does, rubberized undercoating, bed liner. All that stuff hardens up over time. And in our area, that hardness of the shell eventually cracks loose from whatever it's attached to. Even if it was clean metal, it seems like, in my opinion, again, it's just the temperature change that is happening, that, you know, metal's cold and hot, and the material that's attached to it doesn't expand and contract at the same rate. So over time, it kind of pops away from it a little bit. And I'll show you on the car later on what I'm talking about. So what happens is now it makes like this, a very small barrier between the metal that you have and the metal that, and the hardened shell that you put over it, whether, you know, even paints. It'll pop away from it and actually create an area where moisture stays, and actually does more damage to whatever you're trying to work on, or save rather, than the idea if you just left it alone. So especially if the car had damage due to rust and you put it on later. You know, sometimes when it's newer, if you can get a good bond to it, like the bed liners are fairly decent. It's kind of early to tell. Who knows 40 years from now how that's going to hold up, which is still a you know, to do tell. Anyway, this stuff will stay liquid its whole time, and what it'll do over time, it'll just keep going further and further into the little pores of the rust and stopping any moisture from getting in there. To go further on that, when you're doing this, I see a lot of people when they're going to undercoat their car with oil, they take and they hit it with a pressure washer right before they do it, and they wash all the crap off of underneath of it. I can understand taking the stuff off underneath the car, but the problem is you do not want the oil, you don't want this getting wet and then putting the oil on top of it. You're kind of defeating the purpose. Now you're trapping water right in. Like if you were to blow this up, this is all little pores and valleys and all. Butter and toast is kind of my best analogy. I can't really think of something that sounds better, but when you put hot butter and toast and it kind of melts into all the little nooks and crannies, well, that's kind of the same idea that this does. But if you were to put jelly on it first and then try putting the butter on top, it's not going to soak down into it. So again, it traps the water inside there. So I like to deal with the car dry. This car has been in the garage for the most part for about 6 weeks, so it's pretty dry. The areas are fairly dry. So we're gonna go move further ahead. So here's that rocker panel that was put on. Again, I welded it up through here, and it had big rod holes in it, and that section of metal that you saw removed that we were doing the samples on, this is that new piece that is in there. But on the back side of that, it's got a bunch of rust in it. So for me, you can even see it bubbling through here. We already did the doors on the last video. You can see some of it kind of leaking out. But for me, what we're going to do is we're going to spray down inside there and fill this cavity, not fill a cavity, but we're going to spray a bunch in that cavity and have that oil in there, and that oil can kind of slush around onto the bottom of it. And on the back side of this is just bare steel. It's just the, you know, the raw metal that the patch panel came with. So it's nothing else. There's no paint, there's none of that acid, none of that's in there. All right, so we're looking at the front of the car, and you can see where there's some undercoating that is under here. You can also see areas where it doesn't look like it had any or came off at one earlier time, which is this area. This area doesn't look like it was ever protected, but this is where the undercoating was. And if you look, you can see where all this rusty metal, where this is not rusty metal. So this is probably just painted, and this had gotten sprayed some undercoating on it. But what happens is the undercoating literally just kind of pulls away a little bit. Try for this shaky cam. You see how it's hanging down, and it holds that little bit of a gap I was talking about? So what happens is it actually holds moisture up inside there and causes more damage than it does good. It's actually, you know, defeating the purpose. It's holding moisture up inside there and causing rot underneath it. Now, that should be shiny metal. And as you can see, it's not. You know, it's literally creating the rust that is in there, compared to if it was just left alone, it would be fine. That's true kind of all the way around. You can see the beam right here, you know, where oil has touched it before. It doesn't have an issue. These are grease points. This is the pivot point of the front axle beam. They get pumped full of grease and it leaks out of these areas. Well, as you notice, you can see that there's really no issues right around here. It's just when they get away from the grease, here's the grease fitting, you know, that all looks fine, but where it gets away from the grease fitting, there it is rusty. So it's kind of even just showing you, just from the fact that this has just had oil around it that has protected it its whole life. And I'm doing my best to imitate that savings. So I am going to go take some time, go around with a putty knife, and I'm going to go and start scraping off all the loose bits that are hanging and get it kind of ready, because I don't want to spray oil on top of this, just because of the fact that, you know, what's it going to do? You need to get to kind of where the metal is and soak up into the rusty parts that we talked about. So I'm going to go and probably spend about the next, I don't know, hour and a half poking away at that stuff and getting it off the bottom of the car within reason. Again, this is just a driver. We're trying to do our best to save and having the oil protect it so that we could run around in a little inclement weather without feeling like we're killing the rest of the car. So let me get the tires off of it and I'm going to get the scraping. I'll bring you back. Got the wheels off. I just want to show you inside the wheel weller some more of that same kind of stuff that's happening. You could just see where it's just sitting on top and peeling away. Screwdriver's probably not my best bet. Feel like crap that the water splashes up on there and runs down, gets in behind it. Again, of course, this part was able to dry up, but you can see where that dirt is. That's definitely where water is going to be held. Up around the headlight, same thing. This is in the center of the wheel well. This is a really known area for rotting out. You see bodywork's been done on it before. This Bondo hanging down. So, in this case, from the factory, I'd probably say a paint would be better than the undercoating. So we can find a nice area that just wants to fall right off for us. There you go. So that's the stuff where water splashes up behind. Let's get in close on this one. Okay, so water got in behind here, and you can see how flaky the rust is going around. There you go. And it literally just rots out right behind it. There you go. That's a good example of it. So now I'll get into doing scraping the rest of the car. See up inside there. All this area is pretty good already to go straight over. I'm going to show you an area that's kind of, it was probably a rusty area and got then oil and dirt put on it. So I'll scrape this off. And you can see by the way that's kind of coming off. This is like an oil impregnated dirt from the engine. Oil splash kind of coming back and gathering in this area. But it wasn't from new, so I had some rust underneath it. But that rust got protected, kind of like what we're looking to do with like a cruddy, oily, dirty level on top of it. And when you really got to look at it, the metal is really in nice shape, you know. I'm just rubbing on it lightly. I'm not trying to dig in. So you can see how well what we're trying to do can do for it. and you get where it starts to run out. All of a sudden you see a color change in underneath it. Yeah, we did a little bit of damage. Got some crunchies on the floor. This side's much better shape than the driver's side. It's starting to blow out a little right there. So you can poke ourselves a little bit of hole in there, because I am going to want to shoot. I'm going to shoot the air gun in there again, get some crunchies out of the way, but we're going to shoot oil rather, down inside that, get inside that tube, going down that direction, and then a couple from up top. It actually looks not too bad. This car was a Florida car. This one of the owners contacted me to give me a history on it. Of course, I'll screw it all up, but it was a Florida car, and then got cleaned up, an amateur father-son restoration. I'm gonna say that was 15 years ago, and then it went on eBay. Two girls fought for it. It ended up going to California. They had like a bidding war on it. Went to California, California to Colorado, and then Colorado to Connecticut, I think is the trip it took. So I wouldn't say it was always a New England car, but it did sustain its somewhat salt damage. Plus Florida's not exactly, you know, they're not perfect cars coming out of Florida neither. It's the bottom of the gas tank. Alright. So I went and, before I put the door panels on, I shot oil down inside the rockers in the rear quarters, and this you see the aftermath of it coming out of the other side. That's what I mean, working. It just keeps seeping over time till it covers all the areas. So that's all there. You can see what's kind of popping out some here, over here, and that's a better view. So we got some oil right here, still left over from when I goobered it down to the doors, wearing chain oil. And I like trying to try different things. I have some boiled linseed oil. I don't know if those two are compatible. Let's go see if they'll mix, and if they mix, will they thin it? The problem is, especially right now, it's kind of cold. The air temperature is cold. Is to be able to spray it through the gun, it's a little too thick. You can try heating it, but what I find is the air, because the air going through it, through the gun, is so cold that even if you heat the liquid up, the way it draws it up and blasts it out, as soon as the air hits it, it freezes and clumps it up anyway. And maybe we'll try making a batch with linseed oil, boiled linseed oil. One other thing I kind of should probably talk about, and again, I keep changing this all the time, but trying different things just like we are now, is I usually try to get just barn chain oil on it, thinned for the first spray, because it gets in all the little pores and it seeps in. And then what I've done in the past, I've taken toilet ring wax, the little toilet flanges that you buy. They're cheap, you can get them for like $1 or $2, but the wax that's in them. So what I do is I take this, melt it down and melt it into it, and spray it on a later coat, and that really makes a nice hard shell, waxy barrier on top of the oily stuff up above it. But we're not going to do that in this one. So again, this is what is called a Schultz gun. If you go on like eBay and all that, it'll come up. And it's kind of meant to spray the different fluids through it for undercoating, wet undercoatings. Or fluid film's a good one. I find with fluid film, that's probably the first one I started with. And the only thing is, I find it's very thin under the card. It seems like it washes off way too easy. I like it for doing inside door jambs, areas that really don't get affected too much. You know, you're just trying to go seal. I find that really good. Inside frame rails, that kind of thing. But we're going to use the gun for our intended purpose. We still got old inside there. I say we probably go halfway up. Let's go about that much of bar chain oil, and then we'll try the other linseed oil that I left over on the bench. And let's see if that'll make it thin enough. We still may have to cut it with something else. Let's mix that up, give ourselves some room. We'll mix that up, hook the spray gun up to it, see if we can get a decent spray out of it. Let's go try up in the front wheel well, see if we can see a pattern. I think that'll be just fine. I don't want to contaminate the camera though. Kick you back a little bit. Does it make a mess? Sure does. But that's why you want to do most of your work before. That's one of the last steps you do. Again, if you want to do more metal work, like you see the holes that are blown out in this lower wheel well, you know, you kind of want to do that before you start shooting oil, because you really inhibit any repairs you can do in the future. And also the same thing with paint. But this one's going to be a while before we get back to it, so I decided for this car, this is where we're stopping on it for the most part, and I just want to protect it so it doesn't get any worse. And then you can still deal with it later on, carb cleaner and all, brake clean. You can kind of clean off the areas that are contaminated with the oil, but I'd rather deal with that than, you know, bigger rust holes. We got all together. He's a tad shiny now. The boiled linseed oil has a pretty good stink to it, and I figure as that cures, it should go away, but I figure I'd give that as a warning now. First time I've tried using it with a mix. Where I shot on, so I filled the bottle up twice, used up linseed oil when I had with the bar and chain, and then filled up with just bar and chain. And I did a lot of the stuff that was more internal on the inside of the car. Back sides of the bumpers are done. They were scaly. Mostly done. I think we missed a little right there. So you do it more than once. And she's gonna drip for a while, but the stuff's pretty tacky. It'll stick. And now the best thing to do now is put the wheels on it, take it for a ride down a dusty road, and it gets like a little bit of a coating like you saw in the back where I was scraping it off, where it was that dark, waxy, dirty oil. And that's pretty much what you want. Alright, time to clean up my garage. Hey, tires back on. Let's give her a cold start. Hasn't run in a couple weeks. Battery sounding like she wants to go away, huh? Wah, wah, wah. Need a jumper pack on it. Got the Mac pack on it. Let's give her again. Oh, I should give her a couple of these. There she goes. Like a kitten. And just to keep the crap from going down that rail, just shove the plastic bag in there to keep any debris from building up. So let's do the car on a battery charger for a little bit. Let's see if we can maybe help some of this trim that needs to go back on while we're waiting. I'm just using a big chisel. Something to push against. Get that big hump out of there at least. It's got a woohoo in it. How do you get a woohoo out? It's actually very soft. You can bend that by hand. It's like putty. It's like putty in my hands. Yeah, they're about the same condition as the rest of the car. Missing one for now, so we're gonna go make one. You want to go about, let's see, we cut it right about there. It doesn't have the same point on the end of it, but noise alert. And nothing. And the charger is pretty much down to nil. Show the battery pretty close to full. Got the chrome on there. That looks a little better than the holes. This car's a 20-footer, 30-footer. Anyway. Dark out, you want to go for a ride? Got a plate light out. There we go. Hey, you guys can't see much. You're down kind of low right now. I'm gonna run to the gas station, get some gas in it. What I would really like to do is find a really dirty road to take it down. Well, it's nice, like I said, I put 100 miles on it already, and with bias-ply tires, it's actually a lot better than I thought it would be. I let go of the wheel, it's not pulling all over the road. Tires aren't balanced, so I'm sure if I get up around 60 or 70, it's got a bit of a flutter, but it didn't seem bad. Bias-ply tires have a tendency, when the car is cold, to have that anyway, until they warm up. They get like a flat spot in them. Alright, let's go. Gas her up. Then we'll see if I can get you up in the air a little bit more and actually do a drive where you guys can see. Remember the gas caps under the front hood. Generator light glows a little too. Get the good stuff. All 10 gallons it'll hold. Huh? Even got a spare white wall. That's where we put a good $10 in it. What you doing with my screws? Try to. There you go. Cozy. Even clean the windshield. I try and run them. Taking the Jeep. And 3/4 of a tank. know what this nose is good for? Slide. Might be good enough. Want to give her a shot? See how well she slips and slides. Typical Volkswagen. Got a little e-brake maneuver. There's not much snow over here. So that looks from the outside. broke my throttle cable. So I just put it on fast rev. And we're gonna do our best to limp it home. Maybe in second at 13 miles an hour. Downhill, getting 24. And the uphill's coming right around the corner though. Car is up my ass. Home back home. Slight problem, but slowly but surely we made it. Wait, run on. And get the bugs out somehow. Guys, thanks for watching. Later. Here's that rocket that we replaced that had that rusty metal on the inside of it. And then put the sill plate back on. Because I go around and shoot oil everywhere. And then wherever the screws are, screw holes for the sill. Oh, that didn't work good. Blooper reel.